I've seen him lurking for an hour!
Officer, do something.
Sir, I need you to step away from this property and show me some ID. We've had reports of a trespass.
Neighborhoods are supposed to be places of belonging, of community, of trust. But sometimes, the very streets meant to unite can become stages for prejudice. Tonight's story begins not in a courtroom, but on a quiet suburban block, where neighbors tried to weaponize suspicion, and justice walked in anyway. It was a warm evening. Children played on lawns, sprinklers hissed across gardens, dogs barked in the distance. A black man walked calmly down the sidewalk, keys in hand, his stride deliberate, his presence dignified. He paused at one of the houses, checked the lock, and moved on to the next. His routine was steady, his actions precise. But to the neighbors watching from behind curtains, his calm was invisible. All they saw was suspicion. Whispers spread quickly. "Who is he?" one neighbor muttered. "Why is he checking doors?" another asked. "He doesn't look like he belongs here." Their voices carried the weight of centuries of bias, condensed into a single accusation. Within minutes, phones were out. Calls were made. Police were summoned. The man continued his walk, unbothered, unaware of the storm brewing. He checked another lock, adjusted a porch light, inspected a gate. His movements were deliberate, professional, but the neighbor's suspicion grew louder. "He's casing the houses," one insisted. "He's planning a break-in," another declared. Their certainty was built not on evidence, but on prejudice. Sirens pierced the evening. Patrol cars rolled onto the block, lights flashing, tires crunching against pavement. Officers stepped out, hands near their belts, eyes scanning the street. "Sir, stop right there," one commanded. The man paused, turned calmly, and faced them. His expression was composed, his silence deliberate. "What are you doing here?" the officer demanded. "We got calls about a suspicious individual checking houses. You fit the description." His tone wasn't neutral. It was sharp, suspicious, dripping with assumption. The man replied evenly, "I'm working." But the officer pressed harder. "Working?" he scoffed. "This is a residential neighborhood. You don't look like maintenance. You don't look like staff. Tell me the truth. Are you trying to break in?" His words carried across the block, loud enough for neighbors to hear. Curtains twitched, doors opened, whispers grew. The confrontation was public, undeniable. The man's calm never wavered. He handed over his ID without hesitation. The officer glanced at it, frowned, unconvinced. "This doesn't explain why you're here," he said. "You're acting suspicious. You're checking locks, moving from house to house. That looks like burglary to me." His voice rose, his posture rigid, his tone commanding. "Step aside," the officer ordered. "We're going to detain you until we figure this out. If you resist, we'll arrest you. You've got 30 seconds to cooperate." His hand hovered near his cuffs, his eyes locked on the man, daring him to resist. But the man did not resist. He did not flinch. He simply looked at the officer, calm and unshaken, and said, "I own this block." The words landed like thunder. For a moment, silence swallowed the street. The officer blinked, stunned, his mouth opening but no words emerging. Neighbors gasped. Children stopped playing. Phones captured the moment. The man they had accused, the man they had threatened, the man they had tried to criminalize, was not a trespasser. He was the landlord, the owner of every house on the street. The officer's face drained of color. His arrogance collapsed into panic. He tried to recover, tried to soften his tone, tried to backtrack. I didn't know. I thought I was just responding to calls." But the excuses sounded hollow, desperate, transparent. The damage was done. The humiliation was complete. The man's calm expression never changed. "Your job is to protect," he said, "not to profile, not to harass, not to deny dignity. Tonight you forgot that." His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of truth, undeniable and unshakable. The officer swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. He tried to speak, but no words came. He had been caught, not by force, not by resistance, but by reality. And reality was unforgiving. The man continued his walk, unbothered, unaware of the storm brewing. He checked another lock, adjusted a porch light, inspected a gate. His movements were deliberate, professional, but the neighbor's suspicion grew louder. "He's casing the houses," one insisted. "He's planning a break-in," another declared. Their certainty was built not on evidence, but on prejudice. Sirens pierced the evening. Patrol cars rolled onto the block, lights flashing, tires crunching against pavement. Officers stepped out, hands near their belts, eyes scanning the street. "Sir, stop right there," one commanded. The man paused, turned calmly, and faced them. His expression was composed, his silence deliberate. "What are you doing here?" the officer demanded. "We got calls about a suspicious individual checking houses. You fit the description." His tone wasn't neutral. It was sharp, suspicious, dripping with assumption. The man replied evenly, "I'm working," but the officer pressed harder. The officer stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of humiliation. I didn't know. I was just responding to calls." But the excuses rang hollow. Everyone had heard the threats, the accusations, the disdain. Everyone had seen the way prejudice had been wielded like a weapon. And now everyone saw the truth. The neighbors had tried to weaponize suspicion against the very man who gave them shelter. The landlord's calm never wavered. He looked at the officer steadily, his voice measured but firm. "Your job is to protect," he said, "not to profile, not to harass, not to deny dignity. Tonight you forgot that." His words carried across the block, undeniable, unshakable. The officer swallowed hard, his hands trembling, his authority crumbling. The landlord did not shout, did not retaliate, did not escalate. He simply walked past the officer, checked another lock, and continued his routine. But the story did not end on that street. It was only beginning, because accountability could not stop with humiliation. It had to continue with justice. That night, reports were filed, complaints were submitted, Internal Affairs was notified, witness statements were collected, videos from neighbors were uploaded, capturing every word, every gesture, every threat. The officer's misconduct was undeniable, his racial targeting documented beyond dispute, and the neighbor's prejudice was exposed for all to see. The department moved swiftly. The officer was suspended, stripped of his patrol duties, placed under investigation. His colleagues whispered, his superiors frowned, his reputation crumbled. The badge he had wielded so arrogantly now weighed heavy, no longer a shield but a burden. In hearings, the officer tried to defend himself. He claimed he had acted out of caution, out of duty, out of suspicion. He insisted he had not known the man was the landlord. He argued that his actions were justified, but the evidence told a different story. Witnesses testified to his tone, his threats, his accusations. Videos showed his posture, his aggression, his disdain. Neighbors described their shock. Bystanders recounted their disbelief. Staff explained their outrage. Every detail painted the same picture. An officer who had allowed prejudice to dictate his actions, who had denied dignity to a man based solely on appearance. The prosecution laid out the facts clearly. This was not protection, they argued. This was profiling. This was harassment. This was abuse of authority. They pointed to the officer's words, his threats of arrest, his baseless accusations. They reminded the jury that the man had not been a stranger, not a trespasser, not a suspect, but the landlord, the owner of the very homes the neighbors lived in. The defense faltered. Their arguments collapsed under the weight of evidence. Their attempts to justify sounded desperate, hollow, transparent. The jury saw through them. They saw not a protector of the neighborhood, but a violator of its trust. And when the verdict came, it was clear. Guilty. The officer was convicted of misconduct, of abuse of authority, of racial targeting. His badge was stripped, his pension revoked, his career ended. The punishment was severe, the consequences lasting. The very system he had abused now stood against him. The landlord walked away not as a victim, but as a victor. His calm resilience had exposed the rot of prejudice. His dignity had reminded the world that accountability is not optional. It is inevitable. He returned to his office, greeted by respect from tenants, validation from citizens, recognition of his truth. His presence was celebrated, his authority undeniable. But the story was larger than one officer, larger than one landlord, larger than one block. It was about a system where arrogance collides with accountability, where prejudice collides with resistance, and where justice, though often delayed, can still arrive with force. It was about the countless encounters that never make headlines, the silent battles fought on sidewalks, in neighborhoods, in workplaces across the nation. It was about the dignity denied, the rights ignored, the humanity questioned, and it was about the resilience of those who refuse to be broken, who stand tall, who demand justice. The officer's downfall became a lesson. Authority without respect is nothing. A badge without integrity is only metal. And those who weaponize their position against the innocent may one day find themselves crushed beneath the very law they swore to uphold. The landlord continued his work, overseeing properties, guiding tenants, shaping community, but the memory of that night lingered. It became part of his story, etched into his identity. Citizens whispered about it, colleagues remembered it, the officer carried it. It was not a scar, it was a badge of resilience. And yet, beyond the block's fences and porches, the lesson stretched further. It reached into departments where prejudice still lurked, into institutions where bias still thrived, into communities where accountability was still resisted. It reminded everyone that justice is not automatic. It must be demanded, defended, delivered. Because prejudice is not just an act, it is a system. And systems do not collapse on their own. They collapse when confronted, when exposed, when resisted by those who refuse to bow. The landlord knew this. He had lived it long before that night. He had felt the stares, the whispers, the doubts. He had built his career not just against the odds of property ownership and management, but against the odds of perception. And so when the neighbors tried to criminalize him for walking his own block, it was not a new story. It was an old story, repeated in a new setting. But this time, the ending was different. The punishment of the officer sent ripples through the department. Supervisors held meetings. Training sessions were scheduled. Words like bias, profiling, and accountability echoed in halls where they had once been ignored. The case became a symbol, a reminder that authority without respect is fragile, that arrogance without truth collapses. But symbols alone are not enough. The landlord understood that justice must be more than punishment. It must be prevention. And so he spoke publicly. He gave interviews not to boast, but to teach. He reminded audiences that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. He explained that ownership, wealth, or status should never be the measure of respect. Humanity should be. His words resonated. Viewers saw themselves in his calm resilience. They felt validated in their own experiences of being doubted, dismissed, or denied. They saw that accountability was possible, that arrogance could be challenged, that justice could arrive even in places where it had long been absent. The officer's downfall became more than a cautionary tale. It became a morality play, a neighborhood drama that exposed the fragility of prejudice. It showed that systems can fail, but individuals can resist. It showed that arrogance can rise, but dignity can stand taller. And it showed that justice, though often delayed, can still arrive with force. Inside the landlord's office, life returned to normal. Rent was collected, repairs scheduled, tenants served. But the memory of that night lingered. It became part of his story, etched into his identity. Citizens whispered about it, colleagues remembered it, the officer carried it. It was not a scar, it was a badge of resilience. And yet, beyond the block's fences and porches, the lesson stretched further. It reached into departments where prejudice still lurked, into institutions where bias still thrived, into communities where accountability was still resisted. It reminded everyone that justice is not automatic. It must be demanded, defended, delivered, because prejudice is not just an act, it is a system, and systems do not collapse on their own. They collapse when confronted, when exposed, when resisted by those who refuse to bow. The officer's punishment was severe: termination, loss of pension, a criminal record. But the true punishment was deeper. It was the collapse of arrogance. It was the realization that authority without integrity is powerless. It was the humiliation of being remembered not as a protector, but as a violator. And for the landlord, the victory was not in the courtroom alone. It was in the validation of his dignity. It was in the respect of his tenants, the recognition of his truth, the reminder that resilience can turn prejudice into accountability, that calm can turn arrogance into collapse. This story is not just about one officer, one landlord, one block. It is about all of us. It is about the moments when prejudice tries to block the path, when arrogance tries to rewrite reality, when authority tries to deny dignity. It is about the choice to stand tall, to resist, to demand justice. Because justice does not care about the color of your skin. It cares about the truth. And the truth on that night, on that street, was undeniable. So let this story be remembered. Let it be told not as a tale of humiliation, but as a lesson of accountability. Let it remind us that authority must be earned, that dignity must be respected, that justice must be delivered. And let it remind us that when prejudice rises, resilience can rise higher. In the end, the officer lost everything he thought gave him power, and the landlord gained something far greater: the validation of his humanity, the triumph of his dignity, the proof that justice can prevail. That is the story, that is the lesson, that is the truth.